All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're doing a deep dive into Susan Moore's fantastic new release, The Darcy List. This is our July 2026 feature, and as we go through this explainer, you're going to notice this really fun, anime-inspired aesthetic we've put together. It honestly just perfectly captures that intense, youthful energy and the lifelong impact of the ideals we're about to unpack together. So let's kick things off with a question that honestly hits a little too close to home for a lot of us. Did Jane Austen set the bar impossibly high? Susan Moore's novel kicks off with a confession that is basically a massive shared cultural experience. I mean, think about it. How many of us have fallen into that exact trap of measuring real-life, flawed partners against this beloved, totally fictional standard we absorbed when we were, 16 years old? You read Pride and Prejudice at that super formative age, and it quietly shapes and sometimes completely distorts what you expect from real life. Like, is holding out for your own Mr. Darcy actually romantic, or is it a huge problem? That tension is exactly what we're going to explore today. All right, first up, section Drafting the Darcy List, Florence and Alice's Teenage Blueprint. Let's meet the women at the center of all this. Our protagonists, Florence and her absolute best friend Alice, are devoted Jane Austen girls right out of the gate. Fueled by these dog-eared copies of Pride and Prejudice and, that unshakable certainty you literally only have when you're a teenager, they decide to just write down the definitive, absolutely non-negotiable qualities of the ideal man. Their 16-year-old's blueprint is this mix of half joke, half serious, and just ridiculously specific. He has to be really fit in all ways. He needs to be smart and witty. Oh, and obviously he can gallop on a horse. Though they do generously concede that, hey, driving a cool sports car will do. It's a hilarious, super endearing document, but as Florence is about to find out, these kind of absurd teenage demands end up creating a really rigid script for how her entire life is supposed to play out. Now, author Susan Moore points out a huge flaw in this whole setup. She notes the list names qualities. It describes someone who has already arrived. And that's brilliant, right? Moore is observing that this cute little list is actually the completely wrong way to approach love. Why? Because it demands absolute perfection right out of the gate. It completely ignores the most important question of all. It's not about who someone currently is, but whether they are actually capable of growth. Moving on to our next section, Florence's real-life challenges. When life refuses to follow the script. So what exactly happens when you hold on to this teenage blueprints, but, real life actually happens? Florence is warm, she's funny, and she's incredibly perceptive about literally everyone else around her. But her stubborn attachment to this fictional ideal creates this massive blind spot about her own life and what she actually deserves. At age 16, she and Alice compiled that definitive list. Then we flash forward to adulthood. Florence enters this California marriage that, sure, looks super glamorous on paper. Maybe it even checks off a couple of those early boxes, but it turns out to be deeply unhappy and just personally costly. Finally, we catch up with her in the present day in the UK. She's tackling this grueling, entirely unglamorous village pub renovation, fueled pretty much entirely by hope. And it's right there that she meets a brooding Scottish architect. Grounding Florence's thematic struggles in this very physical timeline, going from a dreaming teenager to a woman doing hard, unglamorous physical labor. That's what makes her story so incredibly relatable. And that brings us to this incredibly powerful realization from the book. Wanting someone perfect is a very effective way of not having to risk wanting someone real. Let that sink in. The crucial takeaway here is that this lifelong checklist wasn't just some quirky habit. It was a defense mechanism. By holding out for this impossible, flawless standard, Florence was effectively protecting herself from the messy, unpredictable vulnerability of actual, true intimacy. All right, let's pivot a bit. Section Darcy's true superpower, accountability, beyond the brooding surface. To really understand Florence's breakthrough, we have to look at the real Mr. Darcy. Like, why does this character remain totally indestructible after more than 2 centuries? Well, it is not for the reasons we usually think. See, there's the surface Darcy we all kind of carry around in our heads. The reserved, brooding intelligence, that swoon-worthy moment the mask slips, the perfectly formed romantic hero. But then we have the substance Darcy that Jane Austen actually wrote. A man who is morally accountable, a man who is capable of receiving criticism without making excuses, and most importantly, genuinely changes. Florence spent her whole life chasing the surface, running into men who looked the part but completely lacked the substance. Let's clearly define what we're talking about here, because this is literally the heart of our explainer, accountability.
Darcy's true, defining quality isn't his massive bank account or his intense pride at the assembly ball. It is the incredibly rare ability to be told you are wrong by someone you love, to consider that criticism without flinching or sulking, and to genuinely change your behavior. That right there, that is Darcy's actual superpower. It's what makes him immortal in the literary world.
Let's completely dismantle a very popular modern fantasy for a second by tracking Darcy's genuine arc. Step 1. Darcy is refused by Elizabeth Bennet. So what does he do? Step 2. He goes away and thinks. He doesn't sulk, he doesn't try to explain away her refusal. Step 3. He writes the letter, which is an act of accountability, not just self-justification. And step 4, he chooses to change because he recognizes that she was right. I want you to really notice what is not happening here. Elizabeth Bennet does not fix him. This is absolutely not the fix the difficult man fantasy. She walks away, and he steps up and does the work himself. Corrected by love. I absolutely love that phrase. I want to highlight this evocative quote from Susan Moore's upcoming LitHub essay. Think about other famous literary heroes for a second. Rochester from Jane Eyre is physically reshaped by circumstance. Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights is entirely consumed by circumstance. But Darcy's arc is moral, not just emotional. He is corrected by love, and he actively chooses to be. That one distinction, honestly, changes everything about how we should look at his character. Which brings us to our final section, choosing real over perfect. Trusting your own instincts. Bringing this profound literary insight back to Florence's actual narrative, we start to see how Elizabeth Bennet's legacy of self-possession finally begins rubbing off on her. Elizabeth's refusal to just accommodate male pride as some kind of social duty empowers Florence to realize something big. The men who fit her fictional standard were really just empty performances. They checked the boxes, sure, but they lacked real substance. And then contrast that with her grounded reality. The Scottish architect she meets while she's knee-deep in dust and hard work at the UK pub, he breaks literally every single rule on her 16-year-old list. But this messy, surprising reality is where true, substantial love is actually found. Florence earns the right to be chosen by first doing the really hard work of becoming her own person. By the way, it's pretty fascinating to note that author Susan Moore spent over 3 decades, 30 years, working in film, tech, and media, including a stint at Lucasfilm before writing this. She brings this brilliantly warm, self-deprecating contemporary story to life, and that depth of real-world experience just shines through. You see it in Florence's dry wit, and especially in the beautiful, constant friendship she shares with Alice, which, as Moore points out, is in so many ways the actual great love story of the book. So I want you to really think about this as we wrap up. What is the gap between the love story you imagined and the one actually waiting for you? We all carry these ideals from our youth. They quietly shape what we look for and honestly what we completely overlook. I'd encourage you to examine your own lists, whatever form they might take in your life. Florence's journey leaves us with this incredibly hopeful takeaway. Real love, as messy and surprising and off-script as it can be, is always, always better than the list. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.